These headlines should worry you, especially as not just a gamer, but as a consumer, because it's basically kind of our current reality as far as the marketplace goes, or is slowly becoming that reality. In the headline, kind of eye-catching headline by IGN called Ubisoft exec says gamers need to get comfortable not owning their games for subscriptions to take off. This article takes excerpts from an interview done by Games Industry Biz with Philippe Tremblay, the director of subscriptions at Ubisoft, and subsequently the subscription service that they have called Ubisoft Premium Plus, which, by the way, featured the recent release of the newest Prince of Persia game, The Lost Crown, for $17.99, and early access to subscribers. Despite the access given via PC, Xbox, and Amazon Luna, there have been some questions raised as a result of Ubisoft's newest subscription platform that was rebranded. And this interview by Games Industry is trying to take a look at this within the context of not just what the company is doing, but why they're doing this. And Philippe answers this by saying, we looked at the consumer behavior and how people were interacting with our offer, and we saw an opportunity for us to evolve. When we look at how gamers engage with our different games, we see that our back catalog is still very active and alive. So we saw an opportunity to offer these worlds to our consumers for a lower fee. And this is a response to the behavior that we saw from players. So they saw that not everybody has the money to afford $40 to $60 price tags, even for the older games. And they said, what if we charge you every month and you can play these games whenever you want? In concept, this is this is okay, I suppose, if you do like subscription-based models. If you are fine with this, you're fine with Game Pass, you're fine with PC Game Pass, you're fine with PlayStation's own version of PlayStation Plus, you're fine with Netflix, you're fine with Hulu, you're fine with Disney Plus, and so forth. What is concerning, though, is the quote from which both article headlines derive. And that quote is, one of the things we saw is that gamers are used to, a little bit like DVD, having and owning their games. That's the consumer shift that needs to happen. They got comfortable not owning their CD collection or DVD collection. That's a transformation that's been a bit slower to happen in games. As gamers grow comfortable in that aspect, you don't lose your progress. If you resume the game at another time, your progress file is still there. That's not been deleted. You don't lose what you've built in the game or your engagement with the game. So it's about feeling comfortable with not owning your game. I still have 2 boxes of DVDs. I definitely understand the gamer's perspective with that. But as people embrace that model, they'll see that these games will exist. The service will continue, and you'll be able to access them when you feel like. That's reassuring. So obviously, I have a problem with this statement right here, actually. For decades, we haven't really owned games in the sense we own the IPs, the copyrights, the trademarks. We have to abide by the license permissions giving us the right to play or the right to access to play it. But I don't think anyone has ever argued against that concept of ownership, because in the sense of consumer ownership, as in you being able to pop in the game and play it without it being taken away from you, that's a different story. And the Ubisoft executive is blurring this line here quite a bit, especially within the context of the digital age where access to games is ruled by internet usage. Is it reassuring that your save progress is, there, even if you uninstall the game and it's stored in the cloud on that platform like Ubisoft Plus? Yeah, but that is contingent on if you can access them whenever you feel like. This should say you'll be able to access them if you can, not you'll be able to access them when you feel like, because that is, again, something kind of implied here. And again, I have a problem with what's being said here, because Philippe is speaking for all consumer bases, as if there is no risk here involved at all for any consumer when it comes to possessing access to games, even after you bought said rights to access to games. What's to stop them, really, legally even, to bar you from accessing their games after a certain point? There is really, after you agree to their terms of service, after you agree to their end user license agreement, and so forth, and the different platform rules, there's nothing really right now, at least in the industry, solid enough to block gamers from not being able to access games. If you're not even paying for those games, you're paying for the service to access those games, right? Somewhere along the way, we just let platforms, whether it's console or digital platforms, dictate even how we need to start our games, which leads to concerns over if subscription-based services or gaming libraries online can be subject to the whims of a corporation, or even if it's not about you, it could come down to legal matters between those companies or financial contracts to which one day a game you want to play and maybe is one of the reasons why you even subscribe to that platform or service may just go away, much like how shows or movies go away on entertainment streaming platforms. It happens all the time on Netflix, on Hulu, or whatever. This is a potentially real future for gamers now, which again should worry you or scare you as a consumer, depending on where you are on this kind of like current events, because it opens up a whole can of worms that I think companies and even a lot of consumers don't want to discuss comfortably. And it's not the first time it's sort of been brought up either, because back in 2020, there was some controversy over people discussing from the publisher perspective that streamers don't own the content they stream, and that streamers should be paying the developers and publishers in a licensed model. And this concept can be easily applied to just the average user. And it kind of begs the question of, discussing other kind of peripherals to this kind of, I guess, conversation here, like the cost of games, the cost of publishing games, the cost of developing games. I mean, Marvel Spider-Man 2 took $315 million to make. And to me, that is, to anybody, that's really ridiculous. Is the cost really justified? Whether it was because of the licensing, whether it's because of the cost of employment, the cost of anything really. But I think the main point here is, if you are going to throttle or bottleneck games based on which platform they go to, I think that's a serious concern, because not only are you potentially limiting what games can get released by which developers on which platforms, but you're also essentially stifling the creative space. And you're also basically going to make it so people in the future might need to subscribe to different platforms, even more so than now, to access games. And I just think at this point, the conversation of, oh, this is why we should have never gone digital. There are still physical copies being offered with a good amount of games still. Obviously, I think a lot more people have resorted to going for digital copies because they have the internet connection. They have they can just download it rather than go to a store and pick it up or get it delivered. And I think that's also kind of that is definitely a related conversation to this as well. Should games be made physical? The price tag increases on a lot of these games. A lot of people see it as unjustified, because physical copies, in theory, should cost more than than digital copies, because physical copies you need to take care of, shipping, distribution. You have to actually make the discs, you have to actually make the cases. Whereas with digital copies nowadays, they still have the same price tag as physical copies. And I would say it is partly corporate greed for profit margins, because as we all know, the gaming industry, just based on recent years of recent financials, it's increasing. It's way beyond the multi-billion-dollar status. It might one day reach trillion-dollar status. That's how much is in the game here in this industry. So while we can easily chalk it up to a combination of complicated factors behind the manufacturing games, I think at the end of the day, when we are talking about access to games, that is something to be seriously concerned about, as demonstrated by this kind of thinking from a game company executive. And now that I've talked about the consumer or content creator perspective, I'm going to pivot to an actual game developer perspective in regards to this headline, in the form of Swen Vick of Larian Studios, the developers behind the highly acclaimed Baldur's Gate 3, which goes over why this kind of thinking from the Ubisoft executive is dangerous for game developers as well. Whatever the future of games looks like, content will always be king, but it's going to be a lot harder to get good content if subscription becomes a dominant model. and a select group gets to decide what goes to market and what not. Direct from developer to players is the way. Getting a board to okay a project fueled by idealism is almost impossible, and idealism needs room to exist, even if it can lead to disaster. Subscription models will always end up being cost and benefit analysis exercises intended to maximize profit. There's nothing wrong with that, but it may not become a monopoly of subscription services. We're already all dependent on a select group of digital distribution platforms, and discoverability is brutal. Should those platforms all switch to subscription, it will become savage. In such a world, by definition, the preference of the subscription service will determine what games get made. Trust me, you really don't want that. Too long didn't read? You won't find our games on the subscription service. Even if I respect that for many developers, it presents an opportunity to make their game. I don't have an issue with that. I just want to make sure the other ecosystem doesn't die because it's valuable. I think this echoes a lot of people's sentiments about, again, the physical copies versus digital copies. And that's really it I think we're going to talk about for today. But this is definitely, to me, I don't know, just soulless. This philosophy or thought of gamers needing to get comfortable, not quote unquote owning their games in order for them to make money. I think there's a lot more problems going on within both the gaming and tech industry that need to be looked at before we look at not just doing layoffs, which by the way is also probably unnecessary, but also looking at hurting the consumer base.